Good afternoon, folks. We will be hearing from Qlik and Microsoft how data mesh makes supply chains more resilient, efficient, and sustainable. Before I turn it over to our speakers today, just a couple of notes on the audience console. In case you're new to ON24, if at any point in time today you experience issues with playback, or if your lobby music is still playing, simply refresh the page and that will usually solve the issue. If for some reason you see me in the media player in the left-hand side of your screen, this is where you can control your volume. Before the media player, you'll see a Q&A box where we'd love for this event to be interactive, and we will be hosting a Q&A with our speakers after their presentations today. So if you have any questions throughout the event, please send them in. If we don't get to your question during the live Q&A, someone will reach out via email after the event with an answer. On the right side of your console, you'll see a speaker bio section where you can read a bit more about our presenters today, as well as find their contact information. You'll also see a related content section. We've provided some materials here for you to take a deeper dive into the content discussed today, so be sure to check these out. If at any point these console elements seem to disappear, they all live down in the bottom of your console in your dock, so you can find them there. Without further ado, let's pass it over to our speakers today. Jiva AKR, leader, Azure Cloud Scale, Analytics, Strategy, and Execution at Microsoft, and Dan Potter, Vice President, Product Marketing at Qlik.
Thank you, Libby. So before I talk about my stuff, I thought I would just set the expectations to the audience about how you are actually going to spend the time with us. So number one, thank you very much for all your time commitment. We take your time very seriously, and things that we have done in between Qlik and Microsoft is to ensure that we provide immense value in exchange for the time that you are actually providing to us this afternoon. So between Dan, myself, and Tim, we want to provide you an expectations about what we are actually going to share with you today. In that topic, in the first 15 minutes, I will be covering the what and why, about how the data mesh can actually enable a resilient supply chain. And then from that standpoint, Dan will pick it up and he will go through the how part of it. And then finally, Tim will bring it all live with a demo for all of you to make it real, so that anything that we talk from what, why, how, it will be something that you can actually implement within your organization, consider implementing in your organization really in a short period of time. So with that context, before we go into the details about what and why, I thought it is extremely important for us to level set on two big industry trends that are actually happening right in front of us. Number one, if you think about in the last 30 years, any time when our customers did analytics, it was always focused on the structured data that came from applications like ERP, CRM, and SEM that were centrally maintained and hosted in the central location, like in a data center, and in the recent times in the multi-cloud world, right? But if you think from the analytics standpoint, it was limited only to the structured data. And also the type of analytics that they ran was always focused only on the descriptive analytics, which was focused on yesterday, last week, last month, last year. Now, if you think about what's really happening, the entire enterprise IT landscape is being disrupted right in front of us. What I mean by that is that you all know this really, really well. In the last 4 or 5 years' time, most of our customers have been testing out a lot of different use cases in terms of trying to bring in data from the edge environment. So in the context of supply chain, think about a shipping company trying to bring in the data from the ship. It's the ship location itself could be an edge environment. The containers, which are providing the actual location details, could be another edge data. Or the diesel generator, which is actually powering the entire ship itself, could be an edge data. So think about the complexity that when customers are trying to bring in the data from their entire edge environment. In our own fair estimation, what we believe is that in less than 2 years' time, more than 50% of enterprise analytics is going to be primarily the real-time near real time, and AI ML applications, which are actually going to consume the data directly from the data platform and not the descriptive analytics that we are primarily depending on today. So that's one big industry change that's happening. Now, the second thing, if you think about it, that most of our customers, they have invested a lot of their money in the recent times in digital transformation. We know that as part of those investments, they completely modernize their app environment, starting with just one-off app migrations, now being able to build cloud native applications. Think about the level of maturity that the entire app world has actually gained in the last 5 years' time, both in terms of process and also in terms of technology. You all know this really well, that in the process wise, we have seen the evolution of DevOps, which led to the development of agile development of methodologies. And then from technology perspective, we have seen the evolution of the microservices in the form of Kubernetes and also for Docker for container management technologies and on all that stuff, right? But if you look at it, all the Gartner IDC research reports that were actually published in the recent times, they all clearly state that more than 70% of the digital transformation investments that were done by the customers are still yet to provide value back to them. And if you try to understand why and peel the layers, you can clearly see that as part of the digital transformation, they have taken the app maturity to a completely different level of planet in terms of the maturity, but the underlying data and the data infrastructure is still sitting in 30, 40, 50-year-old legacy architecture and disparate data systems. So from that standpoint, think about all the complexities, the technology complexities that we have already, but also the macroeconomic situations. We all know this really, really well. Pandemic actually exposed the vulnerabilities that existed in the supply chain ecosystem because of the technology barriers that we have, from disparate ecosystems to even the lack of skills all the way through. And more than that, now post-pandemic, now we are entering into an era of both the geopolitical situation constraints and also the inflation, which is actually driving a lot of the dynamic changes in the supply chain industry as well. In short, what was just a technology challenge for any supply chain organization has become massively, it has snowballed into a massive problem for all these supply chain, exposing them for all the vulnerabilities that they had. So now we level set the ground. So we clearly say that this is actually the customer's IT environment is actually being disrupted. We talked about how the digital transformation has taken the maturity level to a completely different level of planet in terms of app, but the underlying data infrastructure is still lagging. Now let's come to the vision about how do we go about for supply chain. Think about for any supply chain customer, if you can actually enable an environment, just like the very first slide that I actually shared with you, irrespective of whether you have the data in an edge environment or in a multi-cloud environment and everything in between, think about an environment and the IT landscape which provides an entire visibility from the time of origination all the way to the execution, with the capability to optimize everywhere in between. That is an amazing vision to have for every single supply chain customers today. Now, if you want to go there, now we need to understand about where we are actually starting. And this is where the majority of the problem that sits within. Even in the couple of slides earlier, we talked about the impact of the disparate data systems in the supply chain ecosystems. Think about it. In the last 30, 40 years, if you see how the enterprise IT data landscape has actually evolved, it is primarily made up of a lot of different building blocks of technologies put together with a lot of very extensive system integration work. All that we did was we kept adding one building block over another as and when these technologies came about to solve a very specific problem in their existence. So now, from Microsoft's standpoint, I think if you want to think about modernizing the data estate, and if you want to rethink the way that the supply chain, digital supply chain bring efficiency in the whole life cycle, we need to think about solutions that starts with number one, aligning and removing all the disparate data systems. So what we mean by that is that from Microsoft's perspective, most of our customers already use best-in-class products from Microsoft, from operational databases all the way to analytics and also even to the governance and Power BI, the BI layer as well. Now, what we have actually done is to bring all these disparate assets that we had into a single ecosystem so that the customers don't have to do a massive system integration work. More than that, what we have actually done is to open this entire Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform ecosystems to partners like Qlik so that they can actually bring their assets and optimize on Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform. So whether you are actually leveraging our products or when you are actually putting together a system by leveraging Qlik products, it's very simple that you don't have to do a system integration work to make it all work. Now, in order to go about a solution, we need to think about, we drew parallel to how the app environment completely evolved to a complete different level of maturity, right? So one, I talked about the technology maturity with the evolution of microservices. And then the second, I talked about the change in DevOps methodology, in the way that we developed applications as well. Similar parallel can be drawn into the analytics ecosystem as well. So from technology perspective, what you're actually seeing here is the evolution of the lakehouse architectural pattern, where customers can actually land all the data in a single ecosystems, and they can actually leverage the performance of Spark clusters to bring curation so that quality data sets can actually serve multiple different workloads instead of moving the data from and also between different data systems altogether. And then the second piece of it is that, as a recent MIT survey suggests, that only 10% of the problem we can actually solve with the technology. The rest 90% is actually attributed to the people, process, culture part of it. That's where the data mesh concept actually comes in. So now we can solve the problem with the lakehouse architecture and the seamless data integration between data estates and all that stuff. Now let's take a look at how the data mesh part, or otherwise the people, process, culture part, impacts the supply chain ecosystem today. So from that standpoint, even Harvard actually published a recent survey in the recent times that 90% of the customers actually responded that a digital infrastructure supporting the supply chain is very critical to the business success. So you can clearly see that almost every single one of our customers are actively thinking about how to modernize their entire supply chain with modern technology and also modern practices. So from that standpoint, in our industry, that there is never a shortage of terms. So time to time, we come across different architectural paradigms. In the last 2 years, we have seen data hub, data fabric, and also data mesh as well. But more so than any other framework, what we have understood is that in the last 12 months' time, data mesh simply has actually gained a lot more traction with customers compared to the other framework. And the reason for that is very simple, that while the rest of the frameworks like Data Hub and also Data Fabric focuses on the technology as a solution, data mesh forces kind of a conversation in a holistic way. We all know this really well. It forces a conversation on the data domain ownership. The second, data must be served as a product rather than trying to deliver it directly from the data sources. And all this has to happen in a seamless platform without compromising the governance and security policies of the organization. So from ownership all the way to the governance, it provides a very comprehensive view of how the enterprises can actually leverage the data mesh framework, which is the primary reason why the customers are getting excited about leveraging this framework to solve some of the problems that they are trying to address in the organization. So in nutshell, almost in every single conversation, this is the, if you were to draw a common denominator about what is the top of the mind for every single CIO and CDO, one, they are taking this opportunity to bring infrastructure simplification to the data estate. That's number one. And number two, the second most important thing is that the operational efficiency in the way that the data is being leveraged and served across the organization. almost every single conversation with the customer starts for me with customers telling me that they are a data rich and information poor organization. So basically what they're telling is they haven't really figured out a way to empower their business to get most value out of the data. And if you have the problem and if you haven't solved it with the data that you have, think about the complexities that you're going to have when you start to bring in all the edge data into your environment, right? So the third piece is the federated data governance. So now let's go and look at how the data mesh in a high level solves this problem. Fundamentally, if you think about it, we all know this really, really well, where every time when customers have actually leveraged data for analytics, it simply involves a massive process of connecting to the data sources, bringing all the data into a common place, and then there is an extensive data system and data integration work that goes on top of it. What we are trying to do here is to eliminate that and go with the data product concept so that, for example, in a supply chain environment, in a retail scenario, where you can get all the POS data that is actually coming in from all the different stores in a particular geography, and the finance team can actually take a look at all the POS data, and they can clearly see what are the products which are actually doing very well, particular geography, and what are the products which are not really doing well in a particular geography, so that they can actually create a holistic view about the seasonality, the demand that's going to come in a short period of time, and all that stuff. And basically with that data, they can actually provide the data sets to marketing, which now can actually work with that to amplify and bring all the external data sets from themselves. Like, for example, building a customer 360 to create a demography profile. So if you want to double the sales, or if you want to provide additional inventory to the particular geographical locations based on the demand that they are actually expecting for whatever other reason, now marketing can actually leverage the data source, enrich that data by including with other third-party data sets. Now they can create a different profile, which the operations team can actually leverage it to optimize the entire inventory or otherwise the supply, right? So you can clearly get the idea in a super high level about how the data mesh actually can provide an efficient cycle for supply chain. Rather than asking all of these individual organizations to tap into the data from the data source, we are actually providing quality data that rest of the organization can actually make use without having to do any quality work or preparation work in between. So in a nutshell, what we are focused on between Microsoft and Qlik is that, one, we are not going to be focused on landing a particular framework. We don't want to become a data mesh sales team between the two different companies. Rather, what we want to focus on is focus on what are our customers are trying to solve for, and providing a North Star strategic vision that leveraging the Microsoft Intelligent Data Framework served on modern analytics and the ecosystem framework that we have actually developed. So in our position, within Microsoft, the challenges that we are trying to solve for are not any different from the challenges that you are trying to solve within your organization as well. So from that standpoint, our humble belief is that there is no one particular framework that actually can come and solve the problem for customers altogether as a magic bullet. The goodness lies in between all these three different frameworks: data mesh, data fabric, and also the data mesh. And what we have been able to do is to borrow the goodness between all these three different frameworks and then come up with a holistic architecture that customers can actually leverage of our scale. Customers of our scale can actually leverage. So from that standpoint, what you're actually looking at right here is a very composable framework that is not monolithic. Basically, the customers, as I said, whether it is an infrastructure simplification or increasing the operational efficacy in the way that the data is being leveraged and served across the organization, or the federated data governance, you can actually leverage the solution from Microsoft and Qlik to start the journey in a meaningful way where you can actually begin. So in a nutshell, what we are talking about is that we are focused not on landing a framework, but providing a composable framework with all the seamless integration that you need between Microsoft assets and also Qlik. The second thing is that the value prop is more in bringing the automation. From the time you ingest the data until the time you empower the data, leverage the data to empowering the business with the data, we are trying to bring automation to empower you with agility and efficiency in the whole process. And the number two important thing that you want to look at it is that anytime when you have landed the data mesh framework, I'm sure you all know this really, really well. It has been a very popular term in the last 1 year time. But what we are talking to you today about is a practical and not a conceptual solution, but a practical framework that has been already implemented within Microsoft and has been working very well for the last couple of years' time as well. So what I'm going to do right now is that now I have covered you the what and why of why we are doing with supply chain. And now the how part of it. I'm going to invite Dan to come and take it away from here. He will provide you the view of how Qlik actually enables and brings it all together for all of you. Dan?
Jiva, that was great. Thank you so much. You did a wonderful job explaining the framework and really hammering the why. So between myself and Tim, we're going to talk a little bit about the how and how do you get there. But first, Qlik, you might know Qlik as an analytics company. We're also a data integration company. I've been doing this for the last 2 decades. And supply chain and manufacturing companies are some of our biggest and brightest joint customers with Microsoft. We have a long relationship and a strategic relationship with Microsoft. And together, I think we can bring to our customers a very unique value proposition. And if you think about the framework as it was just explained and bringing together automation and greater agility for supply chains, together with what Qlik can bring in terms of a data integration fabric and applying it to modern approaches like mesh, I think this is where it all comes together in some very interesting and compelling ways. So I'm going to share a couple of joint customer success stories as well as we go. So the first step to getting there is you need to build that shared data source. And from that, all of the data products can be created. How do you get there? First is onboarding the data. So you need to think about the different sources that you need to bring into your repository. In this case, we're going to show you an example with Synapse. Bringing data in, ingesting that data in real time using change data capture as a mechanism to access data from transactional systems without any impact to those core business processes that are running. So you onboard that data, then you need to transform that data. And you do that with different rules and packages or custom SQL. And all of those transforms are done in a push-down fashion. So we're generating SQL, pushing them down for execution into engines like Synapse. And that's really important, but it's the automation. It's kind of the next step, which is where you start to see a lot of the value, particularly in the context of mesh, which is automating things like data mart creation, providing different views to data. Once we've landed that raw data, creating conformed data sets and different views and marts that are applicable to different audiences and wanting to ingest this data in different ways. Being able to reuse those transformations as outputs into other patterns or other use cases, and doing this full orchestration, automation, and monitoring end to end. This is kind of the first and most important step in thinking about building that data integration fabric. Second piece to think about is, what are the core sources and targets that you're delivering this to? From a target perspective, again, we're going to be talking about the intelligent data platform from Microsoft, Synapse being a really important part of that. But you may have, a data lake, you may have a lake house, you may have a cloud warehouse, you may have an operational data store. You need to have a flexible integration environment to support whatever type of data architecture that you need. From a data source perspective, it's going to come in a variety of different ways. It could be real-time streaming data from IoT and different devices. It could be SaaS applications, SaaS databases. It could be core transactional systems that are running on premise, like mainframe or SAP systems. And it's really the SAP that is the most important one. And we're going to spend a little bit of time today drilling down into SAP because for many organizations, SAP data is the lifeblood, particularly in manufacturing and supply chain. What's really interesting is that SAP says that 77% of all business transactions touch an SAP system. And we know that to be true, especially in manufacturing and supply chain. So it's very prevalent. It's running those core processes, orders, revenue, inventory management, financials, logistics. So we're going to talk a little bit about SAP as being one of those core sources of information that you need to bring in. And what are some of the challenges in supporting SAP? The first challenge here is proprietary data formats. Unlocking SAP is not easy. You've got two challenges. One, different data formats. It's incomprehensive to most ordinary human beings. The second is that it's a very complex data model, tens of thousands of tables. It's hard to discern the different relationships. It's hard to make sense just of the descriptions of those different tables. You've got license restrictions, which makes it hard. The difference between full use and runtime licensing. And finally, the performance and latency. The last thing you want to be doing is querying data directly against your production SAP system. These were built for transactional processing, not for analytic processing. So you want a strategy where for SAP and other core transactional systems, you need to be able to take that data out, replicate it in near real time, and start to analyze that together with other information. From an SAP perspective, here's an example of the different ways in which you'd go about unlocking SAP data. We have different methods depending on different use cases and different requirements, right? So how we unlock SAP data can be done at the application layer through an extractor. It can be done through database triggers or log-based change data capture. These last two, triggers and log-based, provide you that real-time data access. Doing a log-based approach directly against the database is the preferred mechanism because you've got very, very low latency, very little impact to those core systems. So we're pulling this data out. We decode the SAP source structures. We have deep integration and certified integration into SAP to be able to extract all of the metadata. We propagate that metadata. We support a wide variety of different SAP applications, and we reconstruct those data models in an automated fashion. And that's the second part of what we're going to show you. But this first part is all around data movement. How do we move this as fast and as efficient as possible? Because speed matters, particularly when you're doing things like real-time supply chain, logistics, customer 360. The more you can have fast, fresh information, the better your insights, the faster that you can react. So this is about the movement piece. And then the next piece of this is once I've moved to a system like Azure Synapse, how do I create analytics-ready data structures? We have both technology to enable that, but we also have what we call the Data Mart accelerators, and we've built them specifically for SAP. This blends together the extractors, the replication tasks, and predefined models to rapidly getting at not only the data, but creating those analytics-ready data marts and making them domain-specific. So having an approach where you can automate the creation of data marts and be able to satisfy different business functions, different domains, and organize information in a mesh fashion by extracting once and then providing different data marts and views to that is a very efficient way to do that. So what I'd like to do now is invite Tim to give you a quick demo of how this works in action. Tim, you with us?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Let me take over the screen share here.
So what Tim's going to show you is he's going to show you Qlik Cloud Data Integration, which is the latest in Qlik's integration platform, providing everything being delivered, integration platform as a service.
Yeah, so folks, thanks, Dan. What we're going to show you a little bit of today is, as Dan said, Qlik Cloud Data Integration, capability to build data pipelines, to move data from disparate heterogeneous data sources into the Microsoft data platform. Hopefully you're able to see this on the media player. What you're looking at here is a project inside Qlik Cloud Data Integration. And it's the accelerators that Dan alluded to, where you're able to see that we're capturing data, pulling data out of SAP, We're able to move it with low latency into the target environment. And as you can see here from sort of a mesh construct, we're building out along data domains and business processes. So we have a set of inventory data products being built, a set of finance data products, as well as a specific business process around orders to cash to be able to do analytics on that product analytics as was being alluded to earlier. Within our components here, we're moving data into that platform. As we move that data into that platform here, we'll take a look at a reference data store that I've got. We're also able to automate the process of capturing and managing type 2 structures. So a lot of our components are built around real-time data delivery, data movement, and data processing, but also automating the process for you so that it's very much a low to no code environment. We have the abilities you can see here. If you're familiar with SAP, the famous 5-letter German acronyms, we can apply rules to do things like rename data sets, adjust metadata in a global fashion so that you can drive scale into your processes here. Even things like replacing values. If I wanted to correct null values, I could come in and provide, expressions in here to correct the values from a global perspective. And really, again, driving into the automation. So as we've got reference data in here, we've actually combined that with a set of reference data from partners in order to drive out and build a reference data product. And this is transformation capabilities. So as Dan said, very much driven by SQL, a ubiquitous language for many data engineers or even analysts who are building out these types of artifacts. And as we come in and build out transformations, we can come in and very easily and simply add capabilities around custom SQL, so it's that ubiquitous language. What I really like about what we've done here is you don't have to focus on how do we actually orchestrate and process this data. All you have to focus on is what is the business outcome. In this case, we're doing some very simple aggregates. Obviously, this could be a much more complex workload. But what I don't have to worry about is how to physically process this data. Do I want this data to be materialized as physical objects? Do I want it to be materialized in a virtual layer leveraged by the pipeline? All of that is automated by the processing that we handle within Qlik Cloud Data Integration. And even if I leverage that custom SQL capability to build out simple to very complex transformations, I still have the ability to plug in those rules to ensure that I've got standardization of data types, of column names, et cetera, through the pipeline to ensure some of that governance and enforcements of standards that I really need from a business and an IT perspective. I can obviously decide whether these structures are going to be, oops, if I can click the right buttons, whether they are going to be materialized or not. And if we materialize, we can obviously, again, track history, even of the most complex workloads that you're building to support those historical analytic requirements that you may have. So the building of a pipeline allows us to build these components. And as you can see, they're completely reusable. That allows me to build transformations in a very modular fashion so that I can reuse them through the pipeline. So for example, reference data products is actually being leveraged as an output data product into a set of finance, inventory, and order to cash capabilities. Beyond basic transformation, though, if we dive through the pipeline a bit into this inventory consolidation, we also provide the ability for you to derive a data model of those products that you're outputting. So providing a set of data products is obviously a key part of the mesh organizational structure and how we deliver data. But we also want to provide additional context here. Not just here's a set of structures, but an understanding for downstream users of this data, whether it's within this data pipeline or inside a secondary project, of how do these structures relate to one another? How do I want to leverage them? Because I could certainly build a completely denormalized set of data, but I can also build very specific data products, whether it's around analytics or more operational type of use cases. And this just allows me to understand how these structures relate to one another as I build them out. It also drives into what we call data mart automation that Dan alluded to. And I'm going to show you that in a second here. But the net of this is that we build out our data products. It could be a data mart here where I've got a fact table around good movement for inventory, as well as a set of dimensions to provide that analytic view of data that can be consumed for multiple different use cases within the Microsoft Azure data platform. Again, automation is key here. You can certainly come in and build and write some custom transforms, but let's say I wanted to build a more of a feature store, right? A completely denormalized set of data to deliver out for consumers who don't necessarily want to join these facts and dimensions together. I can leverage this capability to do this with a very low code, no code environment. I can select the object, call this my feature store for goods movement. And then I can select the structures that I wish to denormalize, right? 1 to n of these structures. I'm doing this without having to write any code. And I can do that because the model and the metadata that we manage and maintain within our cloud environment allows me to design this data set, to design the output, and all the ETL or ELT and processing required is 100% automated for you to drive that time to market, to drive the ability to process data in an incremental fashion without me having to go through all that workload of how do I incrementally process a 12, 13, 14, 20 table join. So this is the accelerator. These are pre-built packages that obviously you can add into, right? We call them accelerators because like a template, it's to get you kickstarted and start running and add additional structures in this because you're obviously going to have more than just SAP as a source. So now that you've seen a little bit of the functionality in Qlik Cloud, let me just really quickly show you how easy it is to build out a pipeline starting with a brand new project. And just make sure I didn't get logged out of my environment. So I could have done this inside the SAP project that we just looked at, but the first step, as Dan said, is really being able to onboard data. Now I've got a number of different tasks here that we just very quickly went through, right? Onboarding, transforming data, generating those data marts in an automated fashion. And if I'm going to onboard data, I can come in and simply drive through a wizard in order to get data from on-premise or cloud sources. I may have a connection predefined here. If not, I can certainly come in and create a connection of any of the different types that are supported within our cloud ecosystem, whether it's Dynamics CRM, SQL Server on-premise, capturing data from Oracle databases, SAP, etc. Once I've decided where I'm going to get data from, in this case, I have a SQL Server environment running in my warehouse. They're not running their inventory on SAP, but I want to bring this in to add it to my data products. And so I'm going to come in and select and interact here with my SQL Server that happens to be running in an on-premise environment. I could grab a list of tables that I want to leverage and move in real time. Again, this is going to use log-based change data capture. And the automation that's provided here is such that we will create the target structures. We will automatically move the initial load of data, automatically enable change data capture, and start capturing data in real time for you. I can also define whether I want that data tracked from a historical perspective, as we mentioned previously, or if I just want a current set of data. And this will be delivered to the Microsoft Data Platform for me in real time with a direct push from my on-premise environment where I'm running a little component that has direct access to that source system. Now I could go in here and apply rules, right? Do all the type of workloads that we showed before, add columns, apply expressions to that data, add that transformation capability, just to show you how easy it is to continue to build onto the pipeline and explicitly define, say, a data mart. We're going to jump into the model here, which is the metadata that's leveraged for the purpose of building out data marts. And I can come in and I can define direct relationships if I wish to. So product here is related to my product model data set, for example. But I can also come in and take a list of recommended relationships that the system is going to provide for me. And again, this drives out and builds out that data model. This is going to be the basis of my data mesh lakehouse architecture, right? It's giving me that raw layer, that bronze layer, that persistent set of history so that I don't lose any data. I have all the data, whether it's from an audit perspective or building historical analytics. And from here, I can come in and apply transformations or drive straight into a data mart. In my use case here, I just want to use the data mart functionality to denormalize these structures for me so that I don't have to write any code. So we're going to go right into a data mart. It's going to expand this into my data pipeline. And here I can go through what we just showed earlier, where maybe I want to build a product dimension, and I'm going to denormalize all these structures. and the system's going to handle this for me. Maybe I want it to be a type 2 dimension. And so I can come through and very easily and very rapidly build out dimensional structures here, as well as fact tables. Let's build a fact table off of my product inventory data set. I'm going to align, obviously, the dimensions with my fact tables. And I've built out, albeit a very simple star schema, but a set of data products here and data assets that can now be leveraged or published for consumption by Qlik Analytics, by Power BI, or whatever other consumption processes you may have, whether it's API based or additional pipelines where I'm going to share this data. If we go back to the pipeline view, you can see now the beginning of the pipeline. And again, I can add in additional sources here, add in additional components to support the types of transformation requirements that I may have to deliver the outputs to the business. The focus here obviously is around automation, driving time to value, both from an SDLC perspective, because I don't have to write all that code to process the data, but also from a time to data perspective. The capture process against the source system is going to be real time, and these processes can run in near real time in order to process that data, get it hands in the business users as fast as possible. So I realize that was a bit of a whirlwind tour of Qlik Cloud Data Integration. Obviously, if you're interested to see more, we'd be happy to come back and provide an in-depth demo to you and your organizations. So Dan, I think that's it. And back over
thank
to you.
Tim. Yeah, thank you. Very great whirlwind tour. Once we got past the media issue, that was awesome. Before we jump into Q&A, I just wanted to share examples of companies who are taking this approach and some of the results that they are seeing. One of them here is J.B. Hunt. You might know J.B. Hunt. They're one of the largest freight transportation providers in the U.S. If you look at that yellow logo, now you're going to see them all over the highways as you're driving around. They are very ubiquitous. And what they were trying to do was trying to reduce the latency. They wanted up to the minute information for their shippers and carriers. And they needed to blend information from a variety of different sources, including things like legacy mainframe systems on-prem, SQL Server, and move it into modern architectures like Delta Lakes and Azure Synapse. And that's what they did with us together, Qlik and Microsoft. So they're seeing a tremendous value now in being able to blend all that information, being able to automate the movement and transformation into analytics-ready data structures that can be consumed in a wide variety of different ways, including mobile devices directly out to the drivers. Another example is Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz has a new data platform called the MO360. MO360 is really the evolution of their digital strategy for production. In order to do this, they needed to unlock SAP data. So this is a perfect example of most organizations who have SAP as a backbone. Their goal was to help improve overall equipment efficiency. To do that, they needed to unlock this data along with other data, blend in IoT data, data coming directly from the vehicle, other transactional systems, shop floor information, and to do this in a highly distributed and highly scalable way across 10 different data centers. So that's, again, what they've done together with Microsoft Databricks and Qlik. These are great examples of where you can bring together the right skills, the right technologies, the right data architectures, and the right tooling to really yield dramatic results. So I wanted to share a few of these stories before we get into the Q&A. I'll encourage all of you now to ask questions in the Q&A box. What I'll do is I'll put up the call to action as well. If you're interested to learn more, you can scan that QR code in the upper right-hand side. That will give you links to resources, including some of the papers you see on the right. But more importantly, if you really want to realize the full potential, Microsoft and Qlik are offering a great opportunity to get together with real experts in this space. Deep dive sessions, half-day solution architecture workshops, free software, free technical and subject matter expertise. I mean, if you take a look at what's being offered there with no obligation, at least to start thinking about how to take the great framework that Jiva has laid out and thinking about how to build a data integration fabric to support a data mesh architecture, these are the exact conversations that you can have with these experts.